Hello, my name is Osha. Today is April the 26th, 2026. In about 2 weeks' time, uh, it will be exactly 214 years. It will be the 214th anniversary of when the Brits assassinated their first prime minister, right? Well, the first prime minister to be assassinated by the Brits, the first and only prime time a British prime minister was assassinated, and that was Spencer Perceval. So Spencer Perceval was the first and only British prime minister to have been assassinated on May 11, 1812, by a Liverpool merchant, John Bellingham. Now, it was an isolated incident. It was John Bellingham, as they say in America, was a lone wolf. He acted alone, and he was acting on his grievance because um, he had been imprisoned by in Russia by the Russian government, and he was upset that the British government had done nothing to assist him, and so he shot the British Prime Minister Spencer Perceval in the chest, and he died. Well, he was hanged. He was executed. Um, exactly a week after, on May 18, 1812. Now, the reason I'm doing this video, of course, is because of the failed assassination attempt on President Trump yesterday on April 25, 2026, at the White House Correspondents' Dinner. The failed attempt was by a Caltech graduate, and he also has a master's degree from um, uh, California State University. He was working as a part-time teacher, and he's said to be a game programmer as well. His name's uh, Cole Thomas. I don't know if it's some websites have called spelled it Thomas, like Tomas, some Thomas, and last name Allen. Indications are he has family in Rockville, Maryland. Of course, I've done a video. There must be something in their water in Rockville that drives people crazy, deranged. Of course, I think anyone who attempts to kill their leader is, they have their, you know, they have a form of mental disturbance, or they're deranged. Well, those are just my thoughts. It's a horrible thing. Murder is a terrible thing, and attempting to kill the leader of your country, or president of the United States, especially as a lone wolf, you're likely to be killed. If you succeed, you're good. He was lucky he wasn't killed. I was surprised that the Secret Service didn't shoot him. And interestingly, I saw one website described him as white, but the pictures I see, he could be mixed race, but he's got black in him. He's black. He would be described, under the one drop rule, he'd be described as black. I saw his hair, I saw his, the features. The person didn't exactly look, European or white. Maybe mixed race. But you know, well, he would be the first Black American to attempt to assassinate an American president. Of course, there have been prior assassination attempts on President Trump. There was a failed attempt, but not while he was president, while he was on the campaign trail in 2024. The 20-year-old community college graduate, Thomas Crooks, which was rather concerning. He was assassinated. Interestingly, Thomas Crooks as well he had indications of he was actually highly intelligent as well. He had just been admitted to Roberts Morris University and University of Pittsburgh. He had graduated from community college with an engineering science degree, right? He was just 20 years old. Interestingly, he had a SAT score of 1530 out of 1600, which puts him in the top 1% of all SAT test takers. He would have been able to get into an Ivy League. So he had high academic intelligence, right? But so, what was his motivation? His motivation, it is said that his father indicated that he was spiraling into some form of mental illness, mental disturbance because of bullying from school. He was known to have a very notorious body odor, was quiet. He said while he was in high school, he'd done a bomb threat before, although nothing was done to him then, of course, because he was white. I don't know. But, they said, people didn't see that coming. So I guess the FBI and criminologists, they indicate that that his attempt on President Trump's life would have been was probably triggered by the bullying that he was, and that is another terrible thing about America. I come from a society in Nigeria where highly intelligent people are highly respected, right? It's cool to be highly intelligent. It's cool to be to be an academic achiever. In America, America worships the jocks, the bullies. And it's unfortunate that, that kid, he was only 20 years old. And of course, America's descending, it's really spiraling into nihilism. And that's something our founding fathers detested. They didn't want that. I've done an earlier video talking about exaggerated liberty, and this was a reason why Alexander Hamilton himself was against giving the vote to uneducated people because he thought they would be easily swayed by a demagogue, and he called the masses a great beast. He feared Marlborough because of nihilism. He thought people who didn't develop their intellect, were who had a tendency to go into nihilism. Not necessarily the case. I would say that this guy, Cole Thomas Allen, the indications from what I've been reading, they say that he has these diatribes against invectives against Christians, against he shows signs of nihilism, and this is something that I've been noticing. It's becoming pervasive in America. There's increasing nihilism. Nihilism, by the way, means some form of anti-authoritarianism, anti-establishment, can be anti-religion. They don't believe in anything, right? It's like a dystopian. They have a dystopian worldview. So that's this Coleman guy, because with what he did, he's lucky he didn't value his life. He clearly didn't value the life of the president. Even if you're against the president, it doesn't mean you should try and murder him, right? He's still the president. You shouldn't try and murder anybody. That's why we're a nation of laws, right? So I'm trying to take a look at why people have tried to Americans have tried to assassinate their presidents. If we look at in America, there's been um, it's been lone wolves. There's been people acting alone, or in the case of, or maybe the rare situation, the case of Lincoln, the first president to be assassinated. They were conspirators. That's John Wilkes Booth. He was an actor, and it was during the Civil War. He was, he sympathized with the South, and they say he thought the war was not yet over, and that so he went for it, and he assassinated uh, uh, President Lincoln. I'll take a look at how these assassins were also were killed, and it's kind of interesting. So four of our presidents have been assassinated since um, our in our independence, in our 250-year history. uh, the assassins have been individuals. They've been not part of the government, not part of the establishment or military trying to do a military coup or anything like that. Unlike where I come from, I'm originally from Nigeria. In Nigeria, there've been all the assassination attempts or all the assassinations of the heads of states or the the leader or the ruler of Nigeria has been uh, carried out by the military. In while staging a coup attempt or if they've been successful at a coup. The first assassination of our prime minister and a premier of the western region and the northern region, right? Nigeria used to be divided into three regions, right? And then there was a prime minister at the center. The northern region had the premier of the northern region, Sir Ahmadu Bello, who was really the most powerful man. He chose not to be prime minister at the center. He wanted to, because his base was in the north, and he chose to remain a premier of the north, even though the prime minister was sort of his puppet. But in 1966, January 15, 1966, Major Nzogu, he was a military man. They planned a coup. It was an unsuccessful coup. So they wanted to take over power and they assassinated the Prime Minister of Nigeria, Tafawa Balewa, um, and the Premier of Northern Nigeria, Sir Amadu Bello, and the Premier of Western Nigeria, Chief Ladoke Samuel Akitola. Um, Now, and then July 29, 1966, Major General Agui Ironsi, who was head of state, was assassinated by, coup plotters led by uh, Murtala Muhammad. And later on, Murtala Muhammad, when he became head of state, he was assassinated by Dimka, by Colonel, Dimka in 1976, February 1976. It was assassinated. It was a failed coup attempt. I think that was the last time a Nigerian leader was assassinated. Um, so in Nigeria, the motivation has been to seize power. Like a military clique has been trying, a military cabal, military officers have been trying to take power. That's why they've assassinated leaders in Nigeria. In America, that has not been the case. Our military has been very good, very steadfast to the Constitution. We've never had a coup attempt to overthrow the government. So in Nigeria, a military officers trying to overthrow the government have been the ones who've assassinated, the leader, the president, the prime minister, as the case may be in Nigeria. In America, I'm wondering what's our motivation. Did we inherit it from the prime minister eating Dutch? Yes, the Dutch actually in the Rampier, that's the year of disaster in 1672. Uh, they lynched their prime minister, Johan de Witt, and his brother Cornelis. They lynched him and actually roasted their body parts, including their liver and things like that, and they actually ate them. They ate their body parts. That was I'll do a video and discuss that. So, did we inherit it from the Dutch? The reason I say that is, remember, we actually seized New York. It used to be called New Netherlands. We seized New York from the Dutch. England seized New York from the Dutch in 1664, and then they named it uh, the Prince of Wales at that time, who would went on to be called to be King James. Um, he was um, he was he was Dutch of York at that time. He wasn't Prince of Wales. He was Dutch of York, but he went on to be was it King James? He went on to be King James the Second. Yeah, I think he went on to become King James the Second. So he seized it from the Dutch in. I'll correct that if I can remember, but he seized it from the Dutch in 1664, and it became New York. So that's why I was saying, did we inherit this this zest, this mad zest to kill the president from them, or did we get it from the Brits? Did we get it from the Brits? Like I said, the first and only time a British prime minister was killed was in 1812, May 11, 1812, by the disgruntled John Bellingham, who was subsequently executed. Um, you know, Remember, the Brits had also committed regicide. The Brits had beheaded their king, King Charles I, Oliver Cromwell, and his cronies, who established the Commonwealth. They were a bunch of Puritans, right? Then they established the English Commonwealth. So they executed their king, but at least they had a kangaroo court, a mock court. They had a civil war. But what has been the motivation of Americans, right? The first person to assassinate the an American president, that's Abraham Lincoln. The 16th president, like I said, was John Wilkes Booth. John Wilkes Booth did it because he sympathized with the South, and he thought that the war was still going on, and it would sort of be a way to continue the war and give the South some kind of victory. He was killed in a standoff, right? He was killed in a standoff. The other men with him were about four of them who were convicted. His co-conspirators were convicted and hanged. He was, however, shot. That's the standoff. That's John Wilkes Booth. He was shot in the neck by a Sergeant Boston Corbett, who's called. He became a hero. He was known as Lincoln's Avenger. Boston Corbett was a Union Army, was a Union Army soldier, and he shot John Wilkes Booth, in the neck, and John Wilkes Booth was paralyzed, and he died shortly after. Um, Interestingly, Boston Corbett, who killed John Wilkes Booth, he became a national hero, but his life didn't end well because he was declared insane later on, and so he was confined to an insane asylum in Topeka, Kansas. But he would escape. He escaped, and they never heard from him again. He disappeared. So nobody knows how he died. Of course, he must have died at some point, but nobody ever heard from him after he escaped from the insane asylum. So those were the times, right? Weird, eerie times. Um, the second U.S. president to be assassinated was James Garfield by the mentally ill Charles Guiteau. He was really mentally ill. He was delusional. Although he was a lawyer, he was delusional, and he did it because he thought he got a divine command from God to kill him, and of course he was also disgruntled that he believed he was responsible for getting James Garfield elected, and he decided he thought that if he killed James Garfield, that he would James Garfield would sorry his successor Chester A. Arthur would give him the job he wanted. He wanted to be a diplomat, a consular officer, sort of an ambassador. Of course, he was delusional. He was mentally ill. He was really deranged. He was hanged. He was hanged subsequently. And the third president to be assassinated was by an anarchist by the name of Leo Chalgis, right? Chalgis, and all the people who've assassinated American presidents were all American citizens, were American born. So Leo Chalgis was an anarchist. He'd lost his job during the Panic of 1893, and he subsequently, 1893, I think, um, Benjamin Harrison might have been president at that time. But he lost his either Benjamin Harrison or Grover Cleveland. I think Benjamin Harrison. Um, and then he subsequently he became an anarchist, right? And he became an acolyte of the anarchist Emma Goldman. And of course, uh, after he assassinated President William McKinley, who was our 25th president, he was executed via the electric chair. So he died by electrocution. The third president to be assassinated was Lee Harvey Oswald. It's unclear. He was a lone wolf. He had been a U.S. Marine vet. Of course, there are all sorts of conspiracy theories that he was sent by. He was being used by the KGB. It's unclear. Some people have thought it was the CIA. If there was any involvement in the CIA, whatever, it would have been the KGB that had managed to infiltrate the CIA. But anyway, the Warren Commission determined that Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone, right? And how did Lee Harvey Oswald die? He was killed shortly after his arraignment by Jack Ruby. That was 2 days after uh, he assassinated President John F. Kennedy. He assassinated John F. Kennedy November the 22nd, 1963, and he was shot. He was killed about 2 days after by Jack Ruby, who had mob affiliation, right? Mob affiliation, and that's why many people think the mob had a hand in it. Jack Ruby, of course, died, uh, of cancer later on, while imprisoned. Um, so John F. Kennedy, that's the fourth. He's the final president to be assassinated. But of course, there's a guy Hinckley. Hinckley tried to kill Ronald Reagan. He shot Ronald Reagan, but Ronald Reagan survived. Hinckley, of course, was mentally ill. He was delusional. Everybody talks about him being inspired by the book Catcher in the Rye, or whatever. He was clearly mentally ill, clearly delusional. And so anybody who attempts to assassinate a leader, like I said, must be deranged, right? They don't value life. They're ready to die. They're mentally disturbed. That's they're mentally disturbed. In the case of John Wilkes Booth, again, it was a time of war, but he wasn't a soldier. And I think whatever pushes you over the edge to try and kill your leader, well, he didn't view Lincoln as his leader because he sympathized with the South. By the way, he was from Maryland. Interestingly, he was born in Maryland. He was from Maryland. Um, you know, Something about Maryland and assassins. Of course, this new guy, um, uh, Cole Thomas Allen, or Cole Thomas Allen, however it's spelled. He has an affiliation with Maryland, Rockville, Maryland. So something about Maryland, lawlessness and insanity. Uh, in any event, I'll do another video, and maybe I'll talk a little bit about when the Dutch uh, cannibalized their prime minister. They lynched him. As if that wasn't enough, they actually ate his body parts. It really happened. My name's Olurotimi Osha. I'll keep you posted. Thank you.